Hello, once again.
Hello.
It's been a long week. Where are we?
I have no idea.
Where are we? Mom, would you like to help Mike out?
Mom, could you?
Where are we?
Like, I know we're in the VFW hall, but I have a general idea as to where we are. John 6, but just for sake of review, where are we?
John chapter 6.
Okay.
Capernaum.
We're after the second Pentecost. So
Okay.
that's a date, because we know the third one brings us to the end.
Okay.
So, in that sense, we're after the miracle of
Two-thirds.
all the people following him for food. And Jesus basically telling his apostles, I have this power and I can do this, but I need your help. Here, go serve the people. So he's showing, this is what you do when you follow me.
Okay. That's all good. Well, let's go in line now. So where were we in chapter 5? Now when I'm asking where were we, I'm talking about literally, geographically. Okay. Jerusalem. What happens?
Bethesda.
Okay. What happens?
Across the sea.
No.
Walks on water.
No. We're still in
Jesus
chapter
healed on the
5.
Sabbath.
Okay. Healing on the Sabbath. We're there in Bethesda, as Reese mentioned. 5 porches. Bethesda means,
Place of mercy.
huh?
Mercy.
Okay.
House of Mercy.
House of Mercy. So all of those events transpiring there. Argument breaks out between Jesus and the Pharisees. Leaves from Jerusalem. Then where does he go? Where we are in chapter 6.
Wilderness.
Wilderness of where?
Say Sea Galilee.
Okay, so he leaves Jerusalem.
Tiberias.
Right.
Say that.
Leaves Jerusalem. Beginning of chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Goes into Galilee. Crosses over the Sea of Galilee, which is also called Tiberias. And then where does he go?
Bethsaida.
Okay, into the wilderness of Bethsaida. Now, when we are thinking about wilderness in this section of the globe, of the world, and which even I think it's either Mark's account or Luke's account actually calls it a desert place. But is that really the picture? Is that really the landscape of it? Okay, we
No,
got
there's
two.
trees in the back.
Well,
Yeah.
if I'm saying we can't go off of this. Because we know my pictures are not always on track. All right, so what kind of descriptions do we have of the place?
It's barren, but it has grass.
Okay, when he breaks them up into their companies, which Mark tells us, how many companies were they?
Was it 5?
1,000.
Well, they have 5,000 people, but he broke them up into, huh?
5,000 men.
Okay, 5,000 men, not counting women and children. But in breaking the groups up, what's the number?
50.
Huh?
50s.
50.
You keep going down. If I'm leaning in, you need to go up. What is it?
50.
Broke them up into 50s, companies of 50s. And had them sit down on grass. So when we're thinking about the Bible, so there again, the Bible using words that in our vernacular has a different meaning, and then our brain just goes into autopilot and we think, oh, it's a desert place. So we're in the middle of the Sahara. It's just sand, nothing else. But with how the Greek is using it, Old English is using it, wilderness, desert place just simply means a deserted place. And it's a place that nobody's inhabiting, nobody's actually living. It's an isolated place. So that brings us all up to this point where we're then thinking about these things happening in this place and how that this is a wilderness history lesson. This is all going to end up being a reminder of Old Testament Israel's being taken care of in their wandering in the wilderness. And that discussion is going to be brought up in this very chapter. Because what are the Jews going to bring up?
Moses.
Okay, they're going to bring up Moses. He fed us in the wilderness. So you're starting to piece it together. You're starting to pick up on why these things are happening the way that they are, but you're still missing the points. So we have all of this transpiring, these different events connected to the other gospel records. We have been told to us how it is that the Passover was nigh. So we made mention of the fact how that he already has a multitude following him from Jerusalem and following him outside of the cities of Capernaum and that are around Galilee. But with the Passover coming, now you have a multitude of people coming from the east and the north and even from the west, all traveling around so as to get back to Jerusalem to observe this feast. Now, picking up verse 5. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, saw a great company come unto him, he saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? This is the only time that we have recorded that Jesus asks either his apostles or anybody else that's with him, what are we going to do? But it's done for a reason. And the text tells us. So what's the reason?
To test him.
Okay. This is all done so as to test the apostles. This he said to prove him. This is the same type of language that's used of Abraham back in the book of Genesis. When God calls on Abraham to offer up Isaac, it is said that God was testing or proving. God sending the children of Israel through the wilderness during the Exodus. Moses tells the people this was done so as to prove you, to test you and to humble you, to see, to find out, are you going to actually follow God? Now we have God in the flesh. And he's right here with the 12. And he throws out a test for them. Okay, are you paying attention? Are you keeping up with these things and realizing what is actually possible? So this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus already knows. He already knows about the young lad. He already knows about the 5 loaves, 2 small fishes. He knows what action he's going to take. But he's testing the apostles. Okay, how are we going to figure this out? And notice Philip's answer. Philip answered, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, There's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves, 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? What's the problem?
Lack of faith.
Okay, here we have a lack of faith in putting Jesus into a box. But there's also another element. When they're asked about what to do, where do their brains start going?
Humanly to the market.
Okay. We're thinking about this physically. Philip's response is, well, here's the little bit of money that we have. But that's not going to be enough to buy for them to where they're going to be filled. Yeah, we've got a little bit to where we can financially take care of them just a little bit, but it's not going to suffice. Andrew then tries to jump in and pointing out, well, here's a lad with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but then he tacks on to his answer, but what are they among so many? what is that going to do? What is that little bit going to be able to do for such a great multitude? So now what do you think the lesson's going to be?
Put faith in God.
When you are truly putting your faith in God, now that's a key factor in the idea of truly putting your faith in God. Saying it and actually believing it are two different things. Here we have all of this operating from the human perspective. So as Jamie mentioned, as we're thinking about the timeline in this, we've already been through one Passover, fixing to come upon another. How many times does Passover roll around? Once a year. So if we have now coming up the second Passover, which the Passover is the beginning of their year, it's the first month of their year, we now have Jesus and his apostles 2 years together. What should they have already been picking up on?
Faith in God.
What is it?
Faith in God.
Okay. Faith in God. He can provide this. By the very fact of Jesus asking them this question, he is not wanting them to dig into their human resources. He's not, just the question behind the question, if you will. And the lack of insight that they have to where it's just like, if we were there in that situation, I would like to think of myself that if Jesus were to ask me that, I would just be like, why are you asking me? I'm following you. You're the Son of God. Why are you asking me what we would do? So it almost is a reversal. It is a reversal situation of the Matthew 3 event, John 1, where Jesus comes to John requesting to be baptized. And what's John's response?
I should be baptized of you.
I'm needing to be baptized of you. But now we're seeing the apostles, and let's say they had been the ones out there doing the baptizing, and Jesus shows up and is like, okay, I need to be baptized. What's their response going to be?
Right away.
Okay, yeah, let me help you. More than happy to. I get to baptize Jesus of Nazareth. So there's a dilemma. There is a major dilemma inside of their thinking at this stage of their growth and their development, to where it's starting to show, okay, we're starting to think of ourselves a little bit higher than what we should. And even as we connect some of Luke's account to this and Mark's account to this, we're going to find out that there's a heart problem with the apostles here. So the question's being laid out, and Jesus, it's a rhetorical. Jesus is not looking for any real response from them. Because, from the human perspective, this would be impossible. That should have been their first response. We can't. It is impossible for us to feed this multitude. So that's lesson number 1. That with man, it is impossible to deal with the most desperate of needs. And especially when we're considering what the real mission of Jesus is, what's man's desperate need? Salvation. These people are needing deliverance from hunger, but ultimately people are needing a deliverance from sin. Okay, Philip, Andrew, how are you going to handle that? We can't. Man cannot handle this on his own. Which then leads into lesson number 2. Since man cannot provide for the needs that these people have, where do you go?
Jesus.
You go to Jesus. You go to God. But notice that neither Philip nor Andrew say to Jesus in this situation, well, you know, Jesus, there's nothing we can do about it. We know you can take care of it. What had they already seen?
Water turned to wine.
Okay, the very first miracle that Jesus performs, okay, Jesus, we saw you at the wedding feast create something out of nothing.
Evolution.
Yeah, Big Bang. And there it was. You turned water into wine and provided that for an entire wedding feast. I'm sure you can cook something up here. They do not respond that we are confident that you will do something here. They do not throw it over into the position of Jesus. They start taking it on themselves. They immediately start tracking in their own material brain as to what they could possibly do. But as Jamie mentioned at the beginning, this is putting God into a box. Okay, yeah, he was able to turn water into wine over there, but you know, this is bigger than that. We're in a whole new scenario, we're in a whole new situation here. And yeah, Jesus did that, but I just don't know if he can do this. But what's being shown to them, and what's also being shown to us, is that as they are growing into these full possibilities, we also need to have our faith grow into these full possibilities. That the help that God has for their problems, just as he did, so there again, as we're thinking about where all of this is heading. In John 6, we're going to have this huge discussion about Moses in the wilderness and how their fathers ate bread from heaven. And now we have this multitude in the wilderness, and Jesus asked, well, how are we going to feed them? Why didn't they respond, well, let's pray to God that he would feed these people in the wilderness like he fed our fathers in the wilderness? There's so much disconnection with them and their history, with them and the Scriptures and what they know the Scriptures teach, but what's their confidence in what the Scriptures are teaching?
Little to none.
It is lacking. And that, the Jews that they're fixing to deal with, okay, they'll bring that up, but they won't bring it up as a point of, wow, this is similarity between what God did then to what God is doing now. They actually try to bring it up as a rebuttal, an argument against the Son of God, so as to not have to listen to what Jesus is even saying. So here we have the struggle that we are all facing in this life, and especially considering the time frame in which we're living. Are any of us expecting to be fed from heaven?
By an angel or by...
It could happen.
It could.
But anybody expecting that?
No.
No.
But it could.
It could. Now, you think about the struggle that they're having in putting faith in God to provide for their needs. And they're struggling with it, and it's happening. How much more is that struggle for us? It's huge. But it is the reality of, okay, happened in the Old Testament, happened with Jesus, and if he's taking care of them, why is he not going to take care of us? And he is. It's just not going to be by the same means.
Therefore, no angels.
Well,
We ended it.
yeah, sure.
Did I win?
So the struggle is for us that when things get tough, we then want to get down in a pit. That there's nothing here or nothing out there that's going to be able to fix the problems. But what about seeking after God's wisdom to handle those problems? Most people don't go that route. A problem comes up, we automatically start tracking inside of our brain, well, how can we figure this out? Instead of thinking about, well, is there some scriptural principle? Is there some biblical event that I can go back to learn from, to actually help me through the situation? And especially as we're thinking about these things from the standpoint of dealing with church problems. How many church problems could truly be fixed by following not our own understanding? And that's the question that arises. Okay, we've got this problem. How are we going to fix it? And typically, brethren's material brains start to turn in. It's just, well, here's how I would handle it. Here's how I would handle it. And who are they leaving out of the equation?
God.
How would God handle this? And that's the reason why you don't have church. That's why you have churches with problems that continue to grow and spread. Church problems that are never truly fixed because they're not going after God's wisdom. They're not going after God's instruction from His Word. Churches sit back and they do nothing because, well, what can we do? There's no elders. What am I supposed to do? That's the very mentality of Philip and Andrew. Well, we've only got 200 pennyworth. What are we going to do? How about you go buy what you can? Here's Andrew. Well, all we got 5 loaves, 2 fishes. So let's just sit back and cry about it. We're around the Sea of Galilee. What was the occupation of the apostles?
Fishermen.
Or some of the apostles? Okay, we're fishermen next to this sea, and we got a multitude to feed, and you're just like, well, what are we going to do?
Lazy.
Idiots. But that's what happens when we get into a position where we start thinking a problem is too big to fix. No, this is fixable. This is doable. Jesus is here. God is going to provide. God is able to help us. So as we're dealing with this Sandpoint situation again, that was the very mentality they had. We go in, try to point out the problems of Freed Hardeman. Well, what's this small congregation supposed to do against a huge college?
2,000 miles away.
Sounds like to me you're putting God in a box. Sounds like to me you really don't have the right kind of confidence and faith in what God's Word says that it's able to do. Well, just, don't know what good we can do. You won't know until you try. We end up getting that same Elijah self-focus amongst our own brethren. What was Elijah's problem? Hold on to it. Hold on to it. Okay, 1 Kings 18. After Mount Carmel, he's on the run. He's alone in the cave. I'm the only one doing anything. But then he has to be reminded, no, there are 7,000 more that have not bowed the knee to Baal. Elijah was not the only one hiding in a cave. There were thousands of Israelites hiding in a cave, and they were being fed in secret by a priest of God. So there's 7,000 more people that are just waiting to get behind a movement. And that's what we get fixated on. It's just, well, we're over here in Montana. What are we going to do? There are brethren all over this country that are just waiting for something to happen. But we get into that isolated mode to where we start thinking, well, no, we're just a congregation over here, and that's just a congregation over here, and we don't really have anything to do with one another. And if that's the mentality, then we're just dividing up our strength. And that's what more and more brethren need to start waking up to the reality of is, no, once we start getting more and more congregations on this, and they're willing to uphold what the Bible actually teaches, we can start changing things. So as we're here in middle of nowhere, Montana, just a small map dot, we can end up getting ourselves into the same position, in which that's ultimately what the problem is with the folks over here on 93. It's part of the reason why we had to split from them. Because they have this mentality of, well, what are we going to do? If that's how you're going to be, we can't be with you. Because you're just going to hold us back.
Amen.
And it's because we have a different view of ourselves. And it's not because of how we think of ourselves, it's because of how we think of God. Israel would not go in to conquer the promised land. They said, because there's giants in the land, but we're grasshoppers. But the reason why they saw themselves as grasshoppers is because they lost sight of God. And it's the same problem here. Well, yeah, God delivered us from the Egyptians, but He's not going to be able to help us with these people. What are you talking about? So when we don't see God properly and His abilities of what He's able to do, then we don't see ourselves properly. Go ahead, Jamie.
It was just an aside point. It wasn't following along with your points that you made.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Just with regard to the Sandpoint part and the attitude of we're just a small congregation, what can we do? We should also point out that they weren't convinced that it was a wrong thing in the first place.
Well, some of them were.
But were
Yeah.
afterwards when they opened up their emails.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, but some of them weren't. And then some didn't want to be convinced.
And then that leads into the same mentality of, okay, well, some of them were upset by it, saw it for what it was, but then you have those in leadership that weren't willing to do anything about it. Then it's, well, what are we supposed to do against them? Who are we to do anything against the preacher or whoever? That doesn't make a difference. Doesn't matter who's on the side of opposition. And in seeing yourself as being some little peon. That's the kind of people God used all the time. And so there again, like as we're discussing these things, we're talking about Israel back here, we see our brethren doing the exact same thing. The apostles knew about the feeding in the wilderness. Then okay, God can do that here. And our brethren are all the time talking about, they'll present the sermons, dare to be a Daniel. Standing up against leadership. Standing up when you're the only one. But do they really believe that?
No.
No. Because when it comes time for them to be a Daniel, they don't do it.
They're scaredy cats.
God using Gideon. What was the significance of Gideon?
He's the least in his father's household.
Okay. So he's from the smallest family. What else? He's from the smallest family of the smallest tribe. And that's who God chooses to free his people. And then when it comes time for them to actually go out and do battle, what does God do to his armies? He decreases military. So I'm going to use the smallest man from the smallest family and the smallest tribe, and then I'm going to cut down his military force.
Navy SEALs. No.
How does God feel about small things? He loves that stuff. Because by using those elements, he gets all the praise. There's no other way something like that would be possible aside from God's hand being involved in it. So all of this leading then into them taking the 5 loaves and just, you know what, don't sell yourself short. Remember who's on your side. So verse 10, Jesus said, "Make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes, as much as they would." If you remember from chapter 1, we were emphasizing how that it was inside of that chapter, we had the foundation being laid of what it was that John was going to be recording for them and recording for us about God's character and the work that Jesus was going to be about. And a clear picture of that was given to us in John 1:16. Now, don't turn there. Who remembers what John 1:16 says?
God so loved. No.
And to give you a hint, it has to do with a contrast between... contrast to what was in the Old Testament to what we're now going to have given to us by the Christ. I said, don't turn there.
Is it part and full? Is that what the point is?
Okay.
Okay. The Old Testament was part. Now we have full.
Okay, so somebody go ahead and turn there and read it for us.
And of his fullness have all we received in grace for grace.
Out of his fullness. Not a partial. Not a halvesy. But out of fullness receiving grace for grace. Jesus took what the disciples viewed as being insufficient, not good enough, and he gave thanks for that. We need to give thanks for every little blessing that God provides. Even the little bit that we have, and I had struggle saying that because we have more than a little bit. We are one of the wealthiest nations in this world. And we need to be thankful for what we have. And in being thankful for what we have, that's what produces contentment. If I'm thankful with what I have, then I'll be satisfied with what I have. I'm not going to have to build or tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And if I'm in that mode anyways, to where I've got too much stuff for the space that I have, then I need to start dispersing. I've got more than I can handle. What the apostles despised, he gave thanks for. And Jesus multiplied what was viewed as not being good enough. He took that and he fed a multitude. So we have being presented before us another example of the abundance of God's blessings for his people. And that if Jesus is able to use 5 loaves and 2 fishes to feed a multitude, what can he do with this tiny group here?
Yeah. That's the title of our book.
The opportunities are endless. They're boundless. If we will just have the faith to walk it out. Verse 12, when they were filled. As we said, this miracle, the miracles before, they all have John 1:16 as their foundation. What was said to the lame man, the impotent man, chapter 5? What was the question that Jesus asked him?
If you want to be healed.
Wilt thou be made whole? That's full. Jesus doesn't ask him, you want to be made partially better? 1/3 of the way better? Wilt thou be made whole? It's a fullness. And you just look at the abundance of the supply. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Of his fullness have all we received, and grace for grace. And this is not by accident. The preparation, the giving to them to where they're filled, and then there's fragments left over. This is not a situation where Jesus performed this miracle and it's like, oh, whoops, I did a little bit too much. My mistake. I over-provided. That's by design. That is the overflow of God's grace and mercy to not only meet the present need, but also in being able to meet the needs that are held over for what's coming ahead. The multitude is going to have to leave Jesus. They're going to have to go to Jerusalem. They're going to have to continue their trip. What are you going to need? You're going to need provisions. Christians do not get put on the welfare system with God. And what's being prepared is not being wasted. It's not being left behind. It's being put to use. And we'll see that again when we get to John chapter 10, verse 10, and Jesus describing himself, contrasting himself to those other religious leaders that were around him at the time. The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. And this is not just spiritual life. This is physical as well. Jesus came into the world so that we could live, not just survive. And with the phrase, more abundantly, what does the word abundant already mean?
More than you need.
What is it?
More than you need.
Okay, it's a word of excess. It's abounding. There is an abundance that you have. But then you throw the word more in front of that. So you already have abundance, but now it's more abundance. So now we're heaping on top of heaps. When Jesus came to earth, He did not come to just barely do enough so as to help man. He came doing everything that He could to provide for everything that we need. And that's teaching us something about Christianity. That is teaching us something about the system that He came to establish. Christianity is not a barely religion. I'm not doing just enough so as to slide by. It's a fullness religion. And if we in our Christian walk start getting that mentality, well, okay, what's the little bit that I can do so as to be pleasing to God? We need to think about this miracle. And we need to think about the example that Jesus is setting in front of us. It's all or nothing. But then there's also this. If we, in our Christian walk, start thinking, well, I've leaned on God's grace before, but I just don't know if He's got what I need to help me through this. If we start thinking that God's provisions for my problems have run out, we need to think about this miracle. He fed them to fullness, and there were 12 baskets left over so as to handle the next set of problems. God's account does not run out. God's supply does not start wearing thin. And we not only have that illustrated for us in the gospel accounts, go and read the epistles. And especially the letter written to the church at Ephesus. And inside of that letter, pay special attention to the words used to describe God's grace towards His people. You're going to read words such as full, fullness, abundance. He's ever ready to provide. We just have to go to Him for that provision. Not to lean on our own understanding, not to lean on our own strength, not start trying to set out on our own paths. But trust Him. And to not fall into the same trap that these individuals are falling in, to where we start putting God in a box. Okay, yeah, He was able to help with this, but this is just such a big problem. I don't know how we're going to make it through. And that's a good place to start. We can't make it through. We do not have the provisions. We do not have the resources. So trust in the one that does. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. I would argue that there's some significance to the fact that there's 12 baskets left over. Because as we discussed in our sermon about how it is that God provides, okay, God has miraculously produced so as to feed the multitude. But God does not have to do that every single time so as to provide for His people. That in producing the miracle and making that provision, then after that the provisions are laid out. Here's how you're going to take care of everybody. And that the fact is that, okay, Jesus has performed this miracle and He's provided for you now, but Jesus is going to leave. How are you going to be provided for then? The resources are stored over. Here are these apostles. They will continue to provide for you. And then as they provide for the people, others will step up. And they'll provide. And it'll just continue to grow and continue to swell to, just as Paul will describe it in the Ephesian letter, that the body of Christ is able to survive by every joint, by every member of the body, providing what it is that the body needs. But then we also have been shown to us that when these men, then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, "This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world." So again, we have reference to Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 16, and the prophet that Moses had promised by God would arise in like fashion as himself. And we've made mention of the fact that, okay, a prophet is a spiritual messenger. But we're going to find with the next verse that the people still have a problem. And that problem is the same problem that we face today, and that is allowing the physical to overrun the spiritual. So they say with their mouths, okay, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. But the problem that they have is they revert back to seeking after a physical king. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. We have once again an improper perspective of what the mission of the king is. Overemphasizing the miracle and missing the application that the miracle held. They are looking at this event and they're saying to themselves, oh, we like this king who's able to feed us in abundance. Oh, yeah, if we put him in charge, he can feed us with loaves and fishes every day. It's the same problem as the woman at the well. Give me that water. Well, why do you want it? So I don't have to come to this So I don't have to come to this dumb well anymore to draw water. You're missing the point. You're making it all about the here and now. And that's what they're missing also. Okay. Yeah, Jesus fed you with loaves and fishes. You're still going to die. What are you needing? Well, I'm needing whatever it is that can help me to live forever. To be eternal. To be with God. Okay, that's what he's offering. And that he'll go on to say in John chapter 6, it's not this physical bread that you're needing to eat, but it's the bread of his flesh that you're needing to eat. So when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force, that's how strongly they felt about this. There's a mob mentality on this that, yeah, we'll start a revolt right now. We'll start a mutiny right now against Rome, against Herod, against the Pharisees, and we'll put you into that spot. That's not how God operates. Here they are once again thinking purely physical. We get into that same trap. Once again, they're thinking at a low standard. And if I can just meet the low standard of a Christian, and I can have an abundance of health and wealth. That's what a lot of people have the mindset about Christianity. Well, you follow God, everything's fine. But Jesus did not come to earth to offer that. That's not his mission. And the next event in John chapter 6 is going to illustrate that point for us.
Make a statement.
Yeah.
Wouldn't this be a good scripture to use against the premillennialist in the sense that even helping Reese against RJ, doesn't he believe that Christ is going to come and set up a kingdom?
Yeah.
Well, right here, he could have been made king right then, right? But he chose not to, and they said he failed, right? They said that when he came here, he failed, but he didn't. He could have been king right there if he would have allowed them to take him over and allowed him to be made king like they think. And then they come around and they say that he failed, but he actually didn't. He took himself out of the way because that wasn't what his purpose was here, is to be taken and made a king at that time.
Yeah, so John 6:15 definitely plays into the the proper position of that point, and even with what he's going to say later to Pilate, to where if my kingdom was of this earth, then would my disciples fight? But that's him stating it even at this point, close to the 2-year mark in what he's doing. He's trying to emphasize to the people that this isn't what I'm here to do.
Now to add on top of all this, I know I talked to you about this one day, but is this him going back to the mountain, him being tempted by the people to be made king, and he needs to go away by himself and to slow it down because that pole's there? Well, you could be made king and there's a temptation there.
Did we talk about this?
Yeah, I know I talked to you about this.
When?
Month and a half ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, yeah.
Yeah, that was my question, is because the pole's right there to be king, and it's like, no, I need to go pray, I need to be away from you so that I'm not tempted.
Yeah, that's actually the next point I was about to make.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's good that you remembered that, because I didn't remember that conversation that we had. But that's...
Am I not important to you?
Yeah, no, that's
knowing your studies.
that's absolutely right. Here we have all of this taking place, and we know that Jesus has been involved in this on a full day, because it's at evening, or when the evening was coming, that this conversation is being had, and the apostles are saying, well, send them home. Send them away. And then we're going to have the apostles going out on a ship, and we're going to be told that it was dark when they're sent out into the ship. So we have a full day that Jesus has been involved in teaching, he's been involved in healing, and now he's provided a meal. Then this temptation is thrown at him. We're right back in Matthew 4. And we're finding the human side of the Messiah that we oftentimes don't think about. We see these miraculous events and what he's provided and what he's able to do, and we completely lose sight of the fact that, okay, he's gone through all of this. Now he knows that they're wanting to make him king, and then he departs again into a mountain by himself. It's the same type of situation that you have in Matthew 4 when Satan came so as to tempt him. What happened, or what was happening before Satan showed up to tempt Christ?
He's praying and fasting.
Okay, he's 40 days in the wilderness, praying and fasting. Physically, you're in a weakened state. And even to, some degree, mentally as well. Starvation mode is kicking in. And temptation sets in. And now we have that same temptation that was tried by Satan directly, now it's being tried by the people. So before, it might be a little bit easier to resist that because, well, nobody's really following me right now. I don't have any backing, I don't have any support. So it's kind of like a person going into politics. You're first starting your race and it's just, I don't really know if I want to get into it, but then once you start actually drawing crowds and now you know you got supporters and backers and people that are willing to fund you, now it's a little bit easier to jump into that. So here we have the same temptation, it's just packaged differently. It's not the devil directly, it's the crowd. Oh, we'll back you. We'll support you. We'll make you king. But we have another lesson on dealing with temptation. Remove yourself from it. Mark is going to tell us that he sends the apostles across the sea ahead of him, and he disperses of the people. That's by design. But he's been active all day long, tending to others. And now this happens. And just, okay, sending everybody away. And now I'm going to be alone. And he's tending to himself. Resisting that temptation by being alone, communing with God. He went into a mountain alone and he prayed. Now, it's also from this context that I would argue that Jesus is an introvert and that it is far superior characteristic to be an introvert than an extrovert. It's just a little joke.
Say that again.
He's drained by the people. He's got to go and recharge. That's an introvert characteristic.
And Elijah was hangry.
Yeah, that's right. And he needed a nap. Eat and sleep.
Snickers.
Right. Eat and sleep. And so we're going to use the Walking on Water event for our sermon. And I was kind of hoping to get a little bit into the sending away. It's not going to hurt us. It'll be okay. In fact, it might actually help the sermon less that you know about where we're going to go. So, stop there at 15. We'll pick up 16 next week, sending the apostles across the sea, storm arising, and Jesus coming out to meet them. Because again, just like we've mentioned, if we're not connecting all the events together and all the records together, there's so much to this that we're going to miss. And that so like we're reading here in John, and it's just, okay, the people wanted to make him king, and Jesus sent the people away. And if we were just to read John's record of it, we would think, okay, that's just the way it happened. Everything is peaceful. But the apostles are actually upset with what's happening here. But you don't know that if you didn't read Mark. Because, let's just give you a little taste. Is Jesus the only one that's walking away from something here?
The leader of them.
Okay. He's the leader of them. But when you have somebody in authority, don't the people underneath still kind of get something? So if Jesus is made king, where are the apostles going to be?
Sit on thrones.
Sit on thrones? They're going to be in his
men.
court? Be his advisors? Who knows what kind of position they might end up getting?
They might get rings.
And then Jesus just says, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, what about us, Jesus? Why aren't you thinking about us? And that's the problem. You're thinking about you. And in that reality, Jesus is thinking about them too. And that's just, you don't need to be in that position, especially right now. So yeah, that's going to be, so that'll be revealed to us next week, or if you want to read ahead, you can see it. All right, so any questions, thoughts in concluding the feeding of the 5,000? I'm glad we got that yawn on record, on recording. All right, no hands.